Today, I'd like to turn our attention and get your views about an argument over the role of markets in the realm of human reproduction and procreation. Now, with infertility clinics, people advertise for egg donors. And from time to time in the Harvard Crimson, ads appear for egg donors. Have you seen them? There was one that ran a few years ago that wasn't looking for just any egg donor. It was an ad that offered a large financial incentive for an egg donor from a woman who was intelligent, athletic, at least 5'10", and with at least 1,400 or above on her SATs. How much do you think the person looking for this egg donor was willing to pay for an egg from a woman of that description? What would you guess? $1,000? 15,000? 10? I'll show you the ad. $50,000 for an egg, but only a premium egg. What do you think about that? Well, there are also sometimes ads in the Harvard Crimson and other college newspapers for sperm donors. So the market in reproductive capacities is an equal opportunity market. Well, not exactly equal opportunity. They're not offering $50,000 for sperm. But there is a company, a large commercial sperm bank, that markets sperm. It's called California Cryobank. It's a for-profit company. It imposes exacting standards on the sperm it recruits. And it has offices in Cambridge between Harvard and MIT, and in Palo Alto near Stanford. Cryobank's marketing materials play up the prestigious source of its sperm. Here is from the website of Cryobank the information. Here they talk about the compensation. Although compensation should not be the only reason for becoming a sperm donor, we are aware of the considerable time and expense involved in being a donor. So, do you know what they offer? Donors will be reimbursed $75 per specimen, up to $900 a month if you donate 3 times a week. And then they add, we periodically offer incentives such as such as movie tickets or gift certificates for the extra time and effort expended by participating donors. It's not easy to be a sperm donor. They accept fewer than 5% of the donors who apply. Their admission criteria are more demanding than Harvard's. The head of the sperm bank said the ideal sperm donor is 6 feet tall, with a college degree, brown eyes, blonde hair, and dimples. For the simple reason that these are the traits that the market has shown the customers want. quoting the head of the sperm bank, if our customers wanted high school dropouts, we would give them high school dropouts. So here are two instances, the market in eggs for donation and the market in sperm, that raise a question about whether eggs and sperm should or should not be bought and sold for money. As you ponder that, I want you to consider another case involving a market and, in fact, a contract in the human reproductive capacity. And this is the case of commercial surrogate motherhood. And it's a case that wound up in court some years ago. It's the story of Baby M. It began with William and Elizabeth Stern, a professional couple, wanting a baby, but they couldn't have one on their own, at least not without medical risk to Mrs. Stern. They went to an infertility clinic where they met Mary Beth Whitehead, a 29-year-old mother of two, the wife of a sanitation worker. She had replied to an ad that the center had placed, seeking the service of a surrogate mother. They made a deal. They signed a contract in which William Stern agreed to pay Mary Beth Whitehead a $10,000 fee plus all expenses, in exchange for which Mary Beth Whitehead agreed to be artificially inseminated with William Stern's sperm, to bear the child, and then to give the baby to the Sterns. Well, you probably know how the story unfolded. Mary Beth gave birth and changed her mind. She decided she wanted to keep the baby. The case wound up in court in New Jersey. So let's put aside any legal questions and focus on this issue as a moral question. How many believe that the right thing to do in the Baby M case would have been to uphold the contract, to enforce the contract? And how many think the right thing to do would have been not to enforce that contract? So it's about, the majority say enforce, so let's now hear the reasons that people had, either for enforcing or refusing to enforce this contract. First, from those, I want to hear from someone in the majority. Why do you uphold the contract? Why do you enforce it? Who can offer a reason? Yes. Stand up.
It's a binding contract. All the parties involved knew the terms of the contract before any action was taken. It's a voluntary agreement. The mother knew what she was getting into. All four intelligent adults, regardless of formal education, whatever. So it makes sense that if you know what you're getting into beforehand and you make a promise, you should uphold that promise in the end.
Okay. A deal is a deal, in other words.
Exactly.
And what's your name?
Patrick.
Is Patrick's reason the reason that most of you in the majority favored upholding the contract? Yes? All right, let's hear now someone who would not enforce the contract. What do you say to Patrick? Why not? Yes.
Well, I mean, I agree. I think contracts should be upheld when all the parties know all the information. But in this case, I don't think there's a way a mother, before the child exists, could actually know how she's going to feel about that child. So I don't think the mother actually had all the information. She didn't know the person that was going to be born and didn't know how much she would love that person. So that's my argument.
So you would not, and what's your name?
Evan Wilson.
Evan says he would not uphold the contract because when it was entered into, the surrogate mother couldn't be expected to know in advance how she would feel. So she didn't really have the relevant information when she made that contract. Who else? Who else would not uphold the contract? Yes.
I also think that a contract should generally be upheld, but I think that the child has an inalienable right to its actual mother, and I think that if that mother wants it, then that child should have the right to that mother.
You mean the biological mother, not the adoptive mother?
Right.
And why is that? First of all, tell me your name.
Anna?
Anna. Why is that, Anna?
Because I think that that bond that is created by nature is stronger than any bond that is created by, a contract.
Good. Thank you. Who else? Yes.
I disagree. I don't think that a child has an inalienable right to her biological mother. I think that adoption and surrogacy are both legitimate trade-offs. And I agree with the point made that it's a voluntary agreement. An individual made it. It's a voluntary agreement. And you can't apply coercion to this argument.
You can't apply the objection from coercion to this argument.
Correct.
What's your name?
Kathleen?
Kathleen, what do you say to Evan that though there may not have been, Evan claimed that the consent was tainted not by coercion, but by lack of adequate information. She couldn't have known the relevant information, namely how she would feel about the child. What do you say to that?
I don't think the emotional content of her feelings plays into this. I think in a case of law, in the justice of this scenario, her change of feelings are not relevant. If I give up my child for adoption and then I decide later on that I really want that child back, too bad. It's a trade-off. It's a trade-off that the mother has made.
So a deal is a deal. You agree with Patrick?
I agree with Patrick. A deal is a deal. Yes.
Good. Yes.
I would say that, though I'm not really sure if I agree with the idea that the child has a right to their mother, I think the mother definitely has a right to her child. And I also think that there are some areas where market forces shouldn't necessarily penetrate. I think that the whole surrogate mother area smacks a little bit of dealing in human beings. Seems dehumanizing, and it doesn't really seem right. So that's my main reason.
And tell us your name.
I'm Andrew.
Andrew, what is dehumanizing about buying and selling the right to a child for money? What is dehumanizing about it?
Well, because you're buying someone's biological right. I mean, you can't, in the law, as it's stated, you can't sell your own child. Like, were you to have a child, I believe that the law prohibits you selling it to another person or selling it
So this is
into
like
slavery.
baby selling.
Right. To a certain extent. I mean, though there is a contract with another person, you've made agreements and whatnot, there is an undeniable emotional bond that takes place between a mother and a child. And it's wrong to simply ignore this because you've written out something contractually.
All right, you want to reply to Andrew? Stay there.
You point out there's an undeniable emotional bond. I feel like in this situation, we're not necessarily arguing against adoption or surrogacy in itself. We're just sort of pointing out the emotional differences.
Well, but wait, I mean, it's easy to break everything down to numbers and say, oh, we have contracts like you're buying and selling a car. But there are underlying emotions. I mean, you're dealing with people. I mean, these are not objects to be bought and sold.
All right, what about Andrew's claim that this is like baby selling?
I believe that adoption and surrogacy should be permitted. Whether or not I actually will partake in it is not really relevant, but I think that the government should give its citizens the rights to allow for adoption and surrogacy.
But adoption is not, according to
Is
the law.
adoption baby selling?
Well, do you think you should be able to bid for a baby that's up for adoption? That's Andrew's challenge.
Do I think I should be able to bid for a baby? I'm not sure. It's a market. I mean, I feel like the extent to which it's been applied, I'm not sure if the government should be able to permit it, and I have to think about it more, but...
All right, fair enough. Are you satisfied, Andrew?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think surrogacy should be permitted. I think that people can do it, but I don't think that it should be forced upon people that once the contract is signed, it's absolutely like the end all. I think that it's unenforceable.
So people should be free, Andrew, to enter into these contracts, but it should not be enforceable in a court.
Not in a court, no.
Who would like to join on one side or the other? Yes?
I think I have an interesting perspective on this because my brother was actually one of the people who donated to a sperm bank, and he was paid a very large amount of money. He was 6 feet tall, but not blonde. He had dimples, though. So he actually has, I'm an aunt now, and he has a daughter. He donated his sperm to a lesbian couple in Oklahoma, and he has been contacted by them, and he has seen pictures of his daughter, but he still does not feel an emotional bond to his daughter. He just has a sense of curiosity about what she looks like and what she's doing and how she is. He doesn't feel love for his child. So from this experience, I think the bond between a mother and a child cannot be compared to the bond between the father and the child.
That's really interesting. What's your name?
Vivian.
Vivian. So we've got the case of surrogacy, commercial surrogacy. And it's been compared to baby selling, and we've been exploring whether that analogy is apt. And it can also be compared, as you point out, to sperm selling. But you're saying that sperm selling and baby selling, or even surrogacy, are very different.
Yes, they're unequal services.
They're unequal services. Mm-hmm. And that's because, Vivian, you say that the tie, the bond.
Yes, and also the time investment that's given by a mother, 9 months, cannot be compared to a man, going into a sperm bank, looking at pornography, and, depositing into a cup. I don't think those are equal.
Good. All right. So
because that's what happens in a sperm bank.
All right, so this is really interesting. We have, notice the arguments that have come out so far. The objections to surrogacy, the objections to enforcing that contract are of at least two kinds. There was the objection about tainted consent, this time not because of coercion or implicit coercion, but because of imperfect or flawed information. So tainted or flawed consent can arise either because of coercion or because of a lack of relevant information, at least according to one argument that we've heard. And then a second objection to enforcing the surrogacy contract was that it was somehow dehumanizing. Now, when this case was decided by the courts, what did they say about these arguments? The lower court ruled that the contract was enforceable. Neither party had a superior bargaining position. A price for the service was struck and a bargain was reached. One side didn't force the other, neither had disproportionate bargaining power. Then it went to the New Jersey Supreme Court. And what did they do? They said this contract is not enforceable. They did grant custody to Mr. Stern as the father because they thought that would be in the best interest of the child, but they restored the rights of Mary Beth Whitehead and left it to lower courts to decide exactly what the visitation rights should be. They invoked two different kinds of reasons, along the lines that Andrew proposed. First, there was not sufficiently informed consent, the court argued. Under the contract, the natural mother is irrevocably committed before she knows the strength of her bond with her child. She never makes a truly voluntary informed decision, for any decision prior to the baby's birth is, in the most important sense, uninformed. That was the court. Then, the court also made a version of the second argument, against commodification in this kind of case. This is the sale of a child, the court said, or at the very least, the sale of a mother's right to her child. Whatever idealism may motivate the participants, the profit motive predominates, permeates, and ultimately governs the transaction. And so regardless, the court said, regardless of any argument about consent or flawed consent or full information, there are some things in a civilized society that money can't buy. That's what the court said in voiding this contract. Well, what about these two arguments against the extension of markets to procreation and to reproduction? How persuasive are they? There was, it's true, a voluntary agreement, a contract struck between William Stern and Mary Beth Whitehead. But there are at least two ways that consent can be other than truly free. First, if people are pressured or coerced to give their agreement. And second, if their consent is not truly informed. And in the case of surrogacy, the court said, a mother can't know, even one who already has kids of her own, what it would be like to bear a child and give it up for pay. So in order to assess criticism, objection number one, we have to figure out just how free does a voluntary exchange have to be with respect to the bargaining power and equal information. Question number one, how do we assess the second objection? The second objection is more elusive, it's more difficult. Andrew acknowledged this, right? What does it mean to say there is something dehumanizing to make childbearing a market transaction? Well, one of the philosophers we read on this subject, Elizabeth Anderson, tries to bring some philosophical clarity to the unease that Andrew articulated. She said, by requiring the surrogate mother to repress whatever parental love she feels for the child, surrogacy contracts convert women's labor into a form of alienated labor. The surrogate's labor is alienated because she must divert it from the end which the social practices of pregnancy rightly promote, namely an emotional bond with her child. So what Anderson is suggesting is that certain goods should not be treated as open to use or to profit. Certain goods are properly valued in ways other than use. What are other ways of valuing and treating goods that should not be open to use? Anderson says there are many: respect, appreciation, love, honor, awe, sanctity. There are many modes of valuation beyond use, and certain goods are not properly valued if they're treated simply as objects of use. How do we go about evaluating that argument of Anderson? In a way, it takes us back to the debate we had with utilitarianism. Is use the only proper way of treating goods, including life, military service, procreation, childbearing? And if not, how do we figure out? How can we determine what modes of valuation are fitting or appropriate to those goods? Several years ago, there was a scandal surrounding a doctor, an infertility specialist in Virginia named Cecil Jacobson. He didn't have a donor catalog because, unknown to his patients, all of the sperm he used to inseminate his patients came from one donor, Dr. Jacobson himself. At least one woman who testified in court was unnerved at how much her newborn daughter looked just like him. Now, it's possible to condemn Dr. Jacobson for failing to inform the women in advance. That would be the argument about consent. The columnist Ellen Goodman described the bizarre scenario as follows. Dr. Jacobson, she wrote, gave his infertility business the personal touch. But now the rest of us, she wrote, are in for a round of second thoughts about sperm donation. Goodman concluded that fatherhood should be something you do, not something you donate. And I think what she was doing, and what the philosopher Elizabeth Anderson is doing, and what Andrew was suggesting with his argument about dehumanization, is pondering whether there are certain goods that money shouldn't buy, not just because of tainted consent, but also perhaps because certain goods are properly valued in a way higher than mere use. Those, at least, are the questions we're going to pursue with the help of some philosophers in the weeks to come.